All right, well, hello everybody. Today is June 15, 2022. Welcome to June's Coaching in Context series, hosted by the Evidence-Based Coaching Program at Fielding Graduate University. I'm Carrie Arnold, and I'm the Program Director for EBC. And I'm very excited to have one of our faculty members here doing our content today. Dr. Kevin Nourse is going to be our speaker. Before I turn the reins over to him, just a few logistical things. Again, keep yourself muted. This is an interactive session though, so there'll be times when you can come off mute and interact. We want you to use the chat feature for questions or comments. I'll be monitoring that as we go. This session is eligible for an ICF CEU, half in resource development and half in core competency. You need to stay for the entire live session and complete an evaluation to get that CEU. I'll put a survey link in the chat about 10 minutes before the session ends, and you can access that. Please complete within the next 24 to 48 hours. And I'll also put a link into chat about our July session coming up. We'll be doing a day in the life of a coach, and we will have 3 additional faculty members and myself having that conversation. So we hope you can join us for that, and feel free to pass that information around. This is our way of giving back as a university. We want to make coaching conversation and coach conversations available regularly and provide access to all. And we want to contribute to your continuing education. So for those who are here, welcome into the space. If you're listening to the recording afterwards, we hope you enjoy this time. Let me tell you a little bit about Kevin. He's been a faculty member here at Fielding for quite some time. Like me, he got his PhD at Fielding, so he's an alumni and he's an educator, a very valued member of our team. He has mentored and worked with hundreds of learners in the program. He is a professional certified coach. He has done a lot of work with major organizations, Price Cooper Waterhouse for one, and he's the president of his own company based in Southern California. And let's see, what's the name of your company? I'm looking for it.
Nourse Leadership.
Nourse Leadership. Thanks, Kevin. So I'm excited that he's here today, and you get a dose of Kevin. So Kevin, I'm going to turn the reins over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me just pull up my deck here.
Hold on once.
Nice to see everybody. I love doing these because it's really about having a dialogue with colleagues around a really important topic. Let me just pull this up. Let's see. So slideshow. All right. Well, I wanted to set some context. In the last year or 2 years, I've started really shifting my practice focus in terms of coaching to really zero in on leaders in transition. And the reason, my biggest client is a healthcare system here in Southern California who's been through 4 chief medical officers in about 5 years. And the coaching that I've been doing for this system has often focused on more performance, as I call fixer-upper coaching. And typically it's been with leaders coming into the organization who derailed. And then they call Kevin Nourse to kind of try to fix them and undo the damage. So I positioned to the CEO about a year ago, like, let's change the focus here. Let's, and maybe some of you have experienced that, but let's focus more on new leaders that are coming in or who've been promoted, who are still in kind of a pliable state and open to kind of coaching or whatever, to try to prevent the derailment that's happened. And so the more I've done this, the more I believe in this, to the point that I'm really trying to move away from, again, the other flavor of coaching, which is important, but my own niche is starting to emerge. So that's a little bit of the context about this becoming much more important as far as, in my practice. So I wanted just to start off with a case study. This is adapted from a couple different clients that I work with in the healthcare space. Got a physician leader, new to his organization as a major medical center on the East Coast, and came in with a really compelling vision. And pretty soon thereafter, he started to derail. Classic ENTJ type, very direct, decisive, very strategic, very well known in his field for his vision for basically supporting people who are going through cancer with wraparound services. but he comes into a team of social workers and chaplains, and has 3 bosses. And after, really 4 to 6 weeks, started getting widespread resistance from his team because for a variety of reasons. It wasn't because his vision wasn't good. It was very much a case where his style just didn't mesh. So if we could get everybody to mute their audio, please, because I hear some in the background there. So this is like really symptomatic of, again, leaders that maybe don't get the right onboarding or coaching support when it comes to onboarding into their organizations. So in terms of where we're going to go today, first want to define some of the terms, and then just talk about this leadership transitions. What are the challenges? What are the realities that we're seeing? And what are some of the research that's come out around what's going on in that space? Then we'll talk a bit about what does successful leader transition look like? What do we do? How do we affect that? And then I'll share some kind of coaching frameworks and strategies, and then resolve the case with where we go from here and how I worked with this specific individual in the case. Again, feel free to type in the chat box as we continue. We're going to stop about every 10 minutes, take some questions and dialogue. Okay. I do want to start off with just one of the big key transitions, and you all are probably very familiar with Bridges' work. Again, this idea of transition. So we're thinking about if change is the external event, then transition is the inner psychological experience. And we know that leaders go through this when they are in transition, either being promoted or newly hired or expansion of their role. And so the idea is that transitions are tough because, people come in really hopeful, really excited, and then they hit the realities of culture and challenges and demands. Typically new leaders, and maybe you all have experienced this, put a lot of pressure on themselves. They're really under the microscope. So this really is the basis for it. You think about how do we help people through their transition, their psychological process of coping and navigating these new environments. The second definition related to that would be this idea of derailment. So when we don't onboard people appropriately, new leaders, we often will see derailment. And I think many of you maybe have seen this in your organizations. But really lifting this from the Center for Creative Leadership, some of the key points to what it was derail. We've got someone with a track history of success, lots of potential for the future. They're hired for their potential. There's some triggering event or events that happen, something they do, and it results in either being fired, demoted, plateaued, or even marginalized. I often use the metaphor of the body's immune response. So when an infection gets in our body, the white blood cells surround the infection and marginalize it to protect the body. And I think when people behave in ways, particularly around culture, counter to the culture, they are marginalized and often don't know why. And it can lead to derailment, which is really costly on a variety of bases. And then thirdly, what is this idea of leader assimilation? So thinking about how we help people transition into their roles. So again, this is some of the research, an individual who did some really good work on this, but it's really, we think about assimilation as it's a planned intervention. So it's not just a random thing that we do occasionally, but really there's a method to the madness of it. And it really is the key is we're trying to accelerate leaders' adaptation into the organization so they can be functional and create value for themselves and for the organization. So to me, this is a really, really important part of what we're going to talk about. Okay, well, let's talk about, first of all, let me ask this before I go into it. When you think about what makes a leader transition so challenging, what is your experience? So if we could have you type in the chat box, maybe would love to see what has your experience been, either your own transition in a leadership role or what you've seen in your organizations or in your clients. What has been some of the challenges that you've seen? Resistance, Carrie, right? Diane points out leaders don't look like existing ones, right? Oh, that's an interesting one. Cultural misalignment, Caroline points out. New culture, yeah. Loss of control, building trust and rapport with peers. Let's see, Sevda, big one, yeah. Learning while doing, how to accelerate learning. How do I learn all the information I've got to learn? Heather points out the isolation, right? And you particularly think about it, like I left a job where I was at the peak of my game. I had all sorts of networks and connections. And now I go into a place where who do I go out to lunch with? Because I don't know anybody, that sense of isolation. And it could, as Errol points out, it could be a hostile environment. Some organizational cultures are not terribly open to new people or new leaders. Yeah, Diane pointing that out. Yeah. So thank you. Those are all really very much on track. So I wanted to point out this, this idea in terms of leader transitions. This is some research that these individuals did, but they talked about, particularly around CEOs or C-level executives, when they transition up and get promoted up, this idea of kind of unprecedented, these complex challenges, but also the unexpected challenges, the surprises that pop up when they step into these larger roles. They're under a microscope, expected to produce real results really quickly. And oftentimes the challenges are typically, as you point out, with people and relationships all over the culture. But I think that the final point they made, I thought was right on track, was mixed and cyclical emotions. It's not just going through the stages, the Kubler-Ross stages or the transition stages, but it's repeated. So they hit challenges and setbacks, and how do they navigate it? So it's a time of great opportunity and a time of great risk, quite honestly. And again, we go back to Bridges' model, and I think what I found is that in working with some leaders that I've engaged, that the endings part, it's an interesting thing, because I've seen some leaders that are new, they get hired, new into their roles, they're really hopeful and excited, but they concurrently experience some sense of loss and sadness, because they left an organization or a role where they were very familiar and felt very competent. So we know that people can experience both those positive and negative emotions at the same time. So ultimately, I cite this model because really that's our goal, is how to help people move through these places. It's interesting. I use this model in combination with the change cycle, and I just did some surveys in the healthcare client I'm working with to find out where are they in this process. And I still find a lot of people, even after 6 months on the job, are still in this endings and neutral zone place. Sometimes they're getting stuck in that. So it's interesting to look at how we can use this as a map to get people to really this kind of productive place. Let me give you some examples of the kinds of transitions I'm working with in my practice, and I'd love to hear what you all are doing. So a new hire. So I worked with a new chief medical officer, brought in, again, for a compelling vision for telemedicine, was new to a county hospital that was working with. So not only was this individual challenged with coming into a new organization with a very strong county culture, but also jumped the fence from being a surgeon to an administrator. And for those of you who work in healthcare, you know how challenging, those are two different worlds. So you kind of had double transitions going on there. In this case, a vertical promotion. So business development director who got promoted to a sales executive in a biotech, which is another sector I work in. So again, rising up and starting to think about, I call it vertical promotion. I've worked with a client who went through role expansion and restructuring. So I was a chief nursing officer, because of the shifts on the executive team, took on several new departments in her portfolio, and again, went through a transition process. Especially, she worked with some of these departments that she had no experience with. She tended to define her skills as a leader based on her clinical knowledge. Now she's taken on departments that she doesn't know anything about and starts to go through it. Or we've got, I've seen this with working moms. They go out on maternity leave, come back to an organization that probably in many cases looks different, and go through reorganizations while, she's out. So coming back and trying to figure out, now where am I? And also, we think about in cases like this, it's not only transitions professionally, but transitions personally that she's going through in terms of her identity as a mom, and trying to navigate that concurrently with returning to your professional life. Any other examples of the kinds of transitions you all as coaches are working with? So would love to see in the chat box any other kinds of transitions that you've been experiencing or noticing in your clients. Connie, that's a great one. So I worked for Price Waterhouse at the time. It was merged with Cooper's, and though inevitably in any merger, there's usually someone's acquired and someone's the acquiree. So that's a whole different world to work with. Yeah. Any other examples of transitions? Yeah, exactly. Ileana, yeah, we're going to talk about that, but that whole kind of change in perspective, because I think about stage theory of leader development, going from, say, expert to achiever, and that's a whole different mindset for folks in terms of what's the basis of their power. Instead, it points out the lateral move to kind of maybe different functional area or different focus. Yeah, quick growth, changes in leadership needs, transitioning. Oh, Adrian, that's great. Transitioning to retirement. And I've worked with leaders at that stage where they're wrapping things up. And the issue becomes, what has been my legacy and what do I leave behind? So thank you. Those are some really great examples. So speaking to this idea of vertical advancement, again, from a stage theory perspective, we know that some important shifts have to happen as we climb that ladder. I've been working with a number of new managers or supervisors who still, again, are in that individual contributor mode. It's the expert model, meaning their power is based on their technical or clinical competence, and they don't yet see the need to engage people or their direct reports. So it's an important shift. But as we know, as leaders rise up in the organization, it's not just the suite of behaviors, but it's a mindset and how they think about their role and what it means to be a leader. That conceivably, as a leader, I don't need to know the technical expertise of my direct reports, but I need to find a different source of power and value that I create. Yeah, Diane points out the results are now achieved through others, and that's Diane. I don't know if you've experienced that or seen that, but just how difficult that is for some folks to get their heads around. And thank you, the founder going public, working with the board. Now they've got a level of scrutiny and accountability that maybe they didn't have before. Yeah. So again, I think inherent in this idea of vertical advancement are certainly a lot of transitions that match nicely with what people go through in terms of stage theory and evolution. So let's talk a little bit about the realities of transitions. And there's an emerging body of work out there in terms of what's going on. The bottom line with these quotes or these stats are really the idea is that it's happening a lot more frequently. You think fundamentally organizations have to evolve and adapt, meaning that they're going to have to reorganize, which means new leaders. And I think even through COVID, we're starting to see some really interesting shifts that we don't yet know the implications of, but with the whole staffing that so many organizations struggle with, which is how do they get a pipeline of talent, and certainly think about leadership talent. So the bottom line, it really is happening often, and it's happening even more frequently, just based on everything that we're seeing in the lid. And yet the impact is really significant. So when transitions are handled well, it's a good thing. I think that study from the corporate board really looked about this substantial number of leaders that had successful transitions. Really they see evidence linking it to performance in terms of team performance. And the flip is true. I thought that interesting study was 30% of external hires and 21% did not meet criteria in 2 years. And so again, thinking about this interpersonal and self-management skills that play on that. Or even this idea McKinsey pointed out, really good article, this idea that between 27 and 46% are regarded as failures or disappointments. So, really it begs the question, what is going on in organizations in terms of to see this kind of negative impact, which I think is often becoming pretty common. So we think about what is the cost of transitions. It's an interesting place to go. I've seen estimates, and I'd love to see anything that you all have seen in the research or literature, but the hard costs can be substantial. This idea, I've seen estimates from 30 to 40% of salary in terms of every time a leader walks. But I think the other thing we don't often consider is the soft cost, is the lost opportunity cost. I've heard from people I've coached who lost their bosses, their senior executives, and there's I have to reintroduce myself. I lose traction on change initiatives because now I've got to onboard a new executive with it. It could be reputational damage. So, the idea of a revolving door in leadership doesn't do well, and certainly some cultures that are stability focused, working with a county system where they're not used to a lot of turnover, and it creates a lot of anxiety for people in terms of soft costs. So really it becomes then how do we avoid this? because it becomes a really painful issue. Working with the health system now, I'm doing some work, just doing some research in the organization to ask them, because they don't do really much for new leaders. And so I polled, people that have been with the organization less than a year and asked them, like, what was your biggest challenge? And I think some of you pointed this out earlier, but this idea that I'm just not sure exactly what the scope of my role is, or kind of what the expectations are of me. And I thought it was really interesting because as you start to think, or for me, as I reflect on my job as a coach, there's some things that I may not have control over in the coaching relationship. So role ambiguity, yikes. So start to think about more of the systems perspective, which is, yikes, I can coach this executive 9 ways to Sunday, but if they aren't clear about the role of their scope and responsibility expectations, boy, it really surfaces like, what can I do as a coach associated with that? So other transitions, challenges that have come up, and again, in the literature, this was a dissertation that an individual did a few years back. Again, a lot of these that you pointed out, but I think navigating the culture by far is in the literature is really way at the top in terms of what causes challenges in terms of people's ability to advance and to function really well. So there was a really interesting book. Dotlich wrote a really nice book about leadership passages to really break this idea of culture down in terms of what is it about it that causes so much strife for new leaders. A couple of things stand out for me. So in the case study I pointed out earlier about the physician leader coming in, he came in with the answer. In other words, the people that hired him really loved his solution in terms of cancer support. And so he came in with this really compelling vision. The problem was that no one else was on board with it. And he kind of beat people up about it. So rather than taking more of an inclusive approach to doing it, he came in with this really awesome vision that his bosses loved it, but nobody else knew about it. So that really tripped him up. The other thing is that there's a bit of a paradox, because in some cases you'll see leaders kind of get caught in this when they attempt too much too fast, but it's also bounded with being too slow to take action. So it's an interesting polarity, is really finding that sweet spot between you've got to create results fast, but you can't be so fast and attempt too much that you burn yourself out. So I think that's a really fascinating kind of two sides of the same coin. And then I think that the last one, just failing to understand kind of, how we do things around here. It's the unwritten rules, which everybody knows, but nobody can describe that. So I think these are, to me, really, really important ones when it comes down to probably the biggest reason leaders derail and new leaders anyway. So when you think about what makes for a successful outcome, and Michael Watkins, who wrote First 90 Days, really, really compelling book, really identified this model that I've kind of adapted. But really what we're trying to do when we onboard new leaders to help them integrate into the organization, you think about over time, the idea is that leaders start off, they consume, resources. We're paying them salary, we're paying them benefits, all of that goes into it. But hopefully we get to the point where we're actually creating value. So when they talk about a break-even point, that's the point where the executive or the leader is creating more value, or it meets basically the cost of hiring that leader balances with the value they're creating. So the idea is that the more effective we are at onboarding and bringing people into the organization, into their roles, the faster we can accelerate this break-even point and get them to really creating value. So to me, that really is the embodiment, and this is consistent in the literature in terms of success and what it really means. How do we accelerate, in essence, their journey through that transitions model to get to the point where they really are confident, powerful, really generative around that. Any questions? Let me just stop and pause and just see before we continue. Anybody that has a question or a comment before we continue?
I don't see any new questions in the chat yet.
Who's familiar with this break-even point? Is this a new concept for folks? Does it make sense to you? So I'd love to just see some feedback on that in the chat. Carrie, what's your experience been with this concept? And because I know that you do work in a variety of different cultures.
Well, it's funny, Kevin, I was thinking of my break-even point at Fielding.
Oh,
'Cause,
right.
I've been in the role 2 years, and I was reflecting back, on that careful balance of learning and understanding context before initiating change. I think it's a really important conversation to initiate with organizations that are hiring you to come in, is what they perceive the break-even point too.
Yeah, exactly. And I should just say that those numbers really represent months, because when we think about transitions and break even point, the book, the first 90 days, this idea that you've got to be effective or successful in 90 days is been refuted in the literature, that it's not necessarily that. Every culture is different. So whether it's 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, but the key is, how do we accelerate that process so that leaders are creating value and they do kind of achieve that break-even point, which really has a positive impact on their reputation in the organization.
So there is a question around, can you say more about this break-even point? I think you just did, that it's months. Is there more to it? Is there a revenue to it, or is it, what more would you say on that?
Well, it goes back to, how does a leader, new in a role, create value? Is it sales? Is it productivity? Is it successful organizational changes that they've implemented, whatever? So that's very contextual. But the premise is that, again, Carrie, you pointed that out. You come into Fielding, you're trying to figure out this culture and context. So the key is, how do we help accelerate your integration and adaptation into your role, so that you now feel confident and you can produce results versus simply consuming it? So the idea is, how do we accelerate that is really our challenge, I think, in terms of working with new leaders. Because ultimately that's it. We hire you, we pay you this big salary, and we want to see results, and hopefully soon. So that really is what it comes down to. Okay, well, let's talk more about the solution. Where do we go from here? I go back to Kurt Lewin's classic formula, and Charlie Seashore was my doctoral chair at Fielding, a social psychologist who studied at the feet of a disciple of Kurt Lewin. And I often go back to this formula: behavior is a function of a person interacting with their environment. So as a coach, we're often focused on the person, but when we go to think about leader transitions, we've also got to think about the larger system, the environment. So it goes back to that point I made earlier. If I could coach someone 9 ways to Sunday, but if the environment doesn't support their integration and growth and support them, then there's only so little that I can do in that regard. So again, think about the broader thing. Many of you do coaching, but you also do leadership development and also kind of function in broader capacities. And I think with onboarding leaders in transition, I think we've got to consider contextual factors too as a part of it, and maybe hopefully influence it. So what we found, some really good research is kind of zeroed in on three really key elements to what helps leaders successfully transition into their roles or organizations. Is that there's a transition plan that's basically developed and aligned between them and their boss. That transition plan would certainly include things like key priorities, success outcomes, resources available to you. We could even address decision making authority, really thinking about a timed milestones, 30, 60, 90, 120 days. What do we expect? And those transition plans can be very formal, or they can really just, I've often given the checklist of the form to the boss so that they and their direct report, newly hired one, can at least talk about this stuff. So being more informal can be fine as long as the conversation happens, because again, that's not something I can do as a coach as much as really support the integration and success of my client by maybe playing a role in facilitating that conversation if in fact it hasn't happened. But we know that that's a really important part of it. The second part is mentoring support. I often think about helping my client find cultural mentors, people who know the culture, they're well regarded in the system, and can provide context and perspective about history, what got the organization to this place, or why do certain functional areas, think the way they do. So part of what I've been doing with this health system is help them think through this whole transition planning approach, and to think about who are a cadre of mentors they can make available to new hires or newly promoted folks, managers, so that they get that support. And again, to me, that is really an important part of it. I think even as a coach, even if the organization doesn't have a formal mentoring program, I often will probe that with my clients, which is helping them think about mentors they need in terms of specific functional areas, or people have that cultural knowledge. And then the last thing that came out in this kind of overall look at helping people transition is, again, the role we play as executive coaching. So to me, I'm going to kind of dive into that a little bit more fully here. So as we think about what are some of the relevant coaching theories, and this is just a snapshot based on my experience and some of the work, kind of the EBC resources that we have to read. But it's this idea of thinking about what makes for some of the theories. Some of the ones that I tend to use, again, I go back to some of the change cycle, the bridges work, because it really is to me about normalizing the client's experience. They're going through this stage of, I got this great new job. I should be really excited about it, but I'm feeling overwhelmed. And so to make it okay, as we know, is like really be there and really champion the client. Of course you're feeling that. It's okay. Let's talk about that. And helping, really recognize where the client is and what may be going on for them. So I do use that a lot. Shine's, of course, he did a lot of work on culture, as well as some influence frameworks, because I think for new leaders, so much of it is about what is the source of my power, and how do I get things done in this culture for all the reasons we talked about. I've seen a model that boils culture down to 4 key elements, and I often go with these, which is norms, taboos, rituals, and symbols. Let me give you an example. I worked for, I was doing some coaching at a big financial services company on the East Coast. And my client was a director. She got promoted to VP. And in that system, that was basically, she became an officer. The first thing that happened after she got the promotion, they moved a big red sofa, a couch into her office. And she's like, Kevin, I don't need a couch. I don't know why they did this. And I tried to help her understand that in that system, that couch is a symbol that you have made it. Like, just own the damn couch. It indicates that you've arrived. You're probably going to be working so much, you may be sleeping on that couch. But to me, and that it is a really powerful part of that, which was the symbol of what it means to, have arrived at an officer level in the organization. Talk about taboos. So this health system I'm working with, I've seen new leaders nearly derail because they dare to use their cell phones in meetings with the CEO. And that is an absolute hot button for him. So it's very clear when you come into those executive meetings, you do not perhaps even bring your phone out. Or even if you're using an iPad to take notes, the CEO often assumes that you're checking your emails. So when I've coached, new leaders in that organization, I've tried to help them understand some of these taboos, that the nature of a taboo is if you do it, again, that can really marginalize you. And it causes people to really question you, and certainly the CEO. So that's why going and really emphasizing culture and working with our clients to help them understand that is so critical. And then I, stand firmly in kind of the positive psych bucket area with strengths-based leadership, appreciative awareness. Again, I think the way I often practice this is really helping people, leaders on coaching, how best to use their strengths in their new roles, and really take an appreciative look at the successes that they're creating, small wins that are helping them build credibility and legitimacy in their organizations, and just really noticing that and helping them to start notice it. Because again, I think that experience of feeling overwhelmed for new leaders is pervasive. So how do we help them start to notice these things in the progress? And then lastly, again, I rely on a lot of Goleman's emotional intelligence work. He also did a lot around leadership styles, also looking at kind of sister theories in cognitive behavioral therapy, and then resilience. again, so much of the transition process is about emotional awareness and adaptation. How do I navigate these feelings, this fear, this imposter syndrome? I'm new to my role, new to the culture, and to navigate that. So to help them develop strategies to navigate those strong emotions and work through them versus getting trapped in them. And then a lot of the work I've done in my doctoral work was around resilience. And I think transitioning into an organization and a role is really an active, or it needs to really rely on resilience because it is exhausting. And again, it's like
this meeting is being recorded.
I think it's a matter of like drinking from a fire hose because you've got to learn so much and so quickly. So any other, let me just throw that out to the group. Are there any other, those of you that do work with leaders in transition, other theories that you draw upon, that may be similar to these or different ones that you use? But if you want to type in the chat or unmute, we'd love to hear. Other leadership theories that maybe inform your approach to coaching leaders in transition. Okay, well, we'll keep the chat open, so feel free to type those in, but I'm going to go ahead and continue. Let's see. Social over time. Great, thank you, Connie. So this study that I found was really an interesting one because it looked at, well, what is it that coaches need to bring to leaders in transition? This is not necessarily earth-shattering or new, but I think it really underscores, you think about the vulnerable place many of our clients that are in transition are going through. So therefore, creating that positive, trusting coaching relationship is by far, it just is so essential. Meaning, can these leaders who are experiencing all these emotions feel safe with you? And again, the research they found for coaching leaders in transition was that this is by far the most critical. Other coaching qualities really, boils down to this idea of having an understanding of the context of the organization, understanding the organization, what it's trying to achieve, understanding some of the kind of the strategic focus, or even some of the vernacular. I don't have to be the expert in my clients' organizations, but it does help me to understand some of the terms that they might use so that I don't have to ask for clarification, which is why I love working broad and deep in a few clients, because I can really get to know the culture and the players and the context. And then lastly, your ability as a coach to link coaching to kind of their business strategy and their business needs, the results they're trying to create, is really critical in these cases. So again, this is probably true in many versions of coaching or with many different kinds of clients. But again, these researchers found this just particularly critical with leaders in transition. Okay, so I'd like to share with you, there are many ways when we think about coaching for through transitions to approach it, but this is what I basically have converged upon in terms of within my practice. So let me just explain to you the sequence of what I tend to go through. Again, I may adapt this depending on the leader, but with the organization. But what I'm finding more and more with a few clients is they do set the expectation with leaders that they are hiring, for example, that they will offer them a coach. And that's part of the incentive to join the organization. So there's that expectation setting up front, so they know that that will be there to support them. So typically in the first month that they are on the job, I try to get access to the new executive. I love the Hogan because it gives us a real quick and dirty way to get some good feedback that's very rich. It's kind of like, it's not a 360, but it looks at reputation data. So there's a real power to it. I do something called a role assessment, and I'll show you what's comprised of that. But it really is the essence, is trying to figure out what did the last leader do in this position, and what were the lessons learned, and getting some feedback, not about the performance of the new leader because they don't have any reputation yet, but about the role itself. And then we try to set some coaching goals and support the creation of a transition plan in concert with their boss, ideally. I then do some kind of a couple months of ongoing coaching, and then about month 4, typically I'll try to do some 360 assessment Because I find that if there's potential derailing behavior, we have got to figure that out soon. Because as you know, in your organizations you've worked with, that when leaders do something that could derail them, if we don't address it soon, it's only going to get worse and really marginalize them. And then I do some goal setting again at that point, revise the goals, and then do an alignment meeting with my client and their boss and facilitate kind of a conversation around what they discovered in the feedback. And then lastly, as we move, I go back into a coaching mode, and then I usually wrap up the engagement at about month 6 or 7. I often will do a mini 360 to go back to, any shifts that stakeholders or select group of the stakeholders have noticed. And then we talk about next steps in their growth and development and make sure that they've got resources to support them, including mentors and other people that they can rely upon. So let me just point out specifically, when I do that role assessment, I'm going out to different raters and different stakeholders. And these are the kinds of questions I'm asking. Let's say I'm working with, I've got a client now who's in charge of the clinics at the hospital, the ambulatory side. And I might ask her stakeholders, what has worked well in this department or division? What needs to change? So you can see I'm starting to surface those expectations. How would you characterize the leadership style of the former leader in this position? This is really interesting. So I'm coaching a leader now who's much more detail focused. The prior leader was very hands-off. And so, my client is really struggling because her direct reports are really struggling. Part of it is because the styles are so different from hers versus her predecessors. And that made sense to her why they were responding as they did, because again, this style shift. I've done these questions. What did your predecessor, the leader's predecessor, do that this new leader should continue or should start or stop doing? So we can get that input, soon. Are there certain things that the leader did who was in the role prior that was really effective? We hope it continues. And then I like to ask the questions, what would success look like for this new leader in 6 months or a year? And try to, again, bring those expectations to the table so that we can kind of shape the agenda. What are some important norms or taboos this new leader should be aware of? Or what advice would you give to this new leader? Yeah. So let me just stop and pause. Let's go back to this. So those of you that are doing transition coaching with in this context, are there other approaches that you've used as you think about the trajectory of an engagement?
Kevin, can I ask a question really quick?
Yeah, sure.
This is Eliana. And my question is, with these role assessments, and I can see some of these being questions that you would want to ask versus the leader, but can any of these be adjusted so that the leader in their rounding, which I always encourage leaders to do that first 90 days, could use also? So is there a way to adjust any of these questions that might be valuable for the leader to learn for themselves?
Yeah, that would be a good way. When I design the coaching engagement, we would talk about how we want to do that. So we need to get that data. Is it I get it? Is it the leader gets it?
Okay.
That kind of thing. So totally, it's all adaptable depending on the system and the culture. So it's a good question. Like anything, we have to adapt based on what works for the culture.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Exactly. Yep. Great.
Kevin, Diane brought up a really good point. There's just this ongoing reveal of general dissatisfaction with leadership, and what is shifting and how to incorporate this into coaching of new leaders?
Yeah, it's part of a, kind of cataclysmic shift that I think started, with pandemic. And as we think about staffing issues, it suggests that, leaders aren't hitting the mark. So I think this may be part of it, which is, people that are coming into leadership positions now. I think it makes surfacing these expectations earlier really critical. So in this great realignment, the idea that it becomes, how do we tap what are the new expectations of, organizational participants and staff? So how do we get that data up to a new leader so they know that this is part of that great realignment? They have very different expectations about your role as a leader. So I'm all about feedback. Let's get those expectations out early. And that way the leader knows kind of what success looks like. So Dinah, I think there's many ways to look at that, but I think that may be a part of it, which is how do we give voice to people in the system to articulate what those needs are, and try to figure that out and hopefully empower new leaders to take that to heart. So it's a great question. Well, I did want to just kind of tie it together again with taking the theory into practice and some of the things I specifically do in coaching engagements associated with transition coaching. And again, as I mentioned, is noticing and understanding the whole cultural norms, the taboos, the symbols, the rituals, getting my clients, helping them to start notice these things because they may not see it. So it's giving them a chance to notice it. It's almost like inviting them to design experiments to go learn about the culture and maybe talk to their cultural mentors, find out what's going on, who gets ahead, who's sanctioned in this organization, what are some of the norms. As we talked about, to be in transition means you've got to learn a lot. So how do we enhance our clients' capacity to learn and adapt? So really I often will ask that question, what are you learning since we last met? What have you learned about the culture? What have you learned about yourself? And I think as I worked with new coaches, many times we forget that, to me, that's a big part of a role. It's not just creating results, but deepening learning for folks or our clients. There's a tendency when new leaders come in, they focus on the technical nature of their job, but they often forget the people and culture focus. So making sure that there's some balance to that. So not only where the client we're coaching is focused, but what are they not focused on that maybe they do that could get in their way? I talked about using the appreciative approach of celebrating wins, again, to deepen the learning. So it's not just you had a success, Carrie, but what do you think you did to create that success, right? So how do we really ingrain that and deepen it? I think we often leave it on the table when in fact, that's a place to probe it. Again, classic building support systems. I always like to think about part of my job as a coach is to put myself out of a job, meaning the client is coaching themselves, but they also have developmental partners in their organizations to support their ongoing growth and development. Because in a perfect world, you don't need a coach to gather 360 feedback. A client knows how to go and ask for it. To me, that's success. And it really is in a case like this. Visibility for new leaders is really important. In the hospital systems, they talk about rounding, visible leadership. So with this one executive I'm coaching, her raters are like, we hear about her, but we've never seen her. We don't know who she is. Embedded in that is like, I can't trust someone I don't see. So really thinking about how to get people visible. And we know, especially in tough times, how important visible leadership is. Creating inclusive goals and visions. Again, that whole phenomena of leaders come in with kind of the clay tablets of their vision, to impose on the organization, and helping them to think about maybe, it's time to be more inclusive in how you create that vision. Who are the key stakeholders that need to have a voice? And then I think, but the bottom line, alignment is critical for new leaders in transition, but especially with their boss. We're talking about alignment in terms of their communication. We're talking alignment of their vision and priorities, that kind of thing. I often use the metaphor with clients that your relationship with your boss is like the umbilical cord, and you've got to have that. It's really hard to be big as a leader if, in fact, you're disconnected from your boss. That's not a sustainable thing in the long term. Yeah. So anything else that you all who are doing transition coaching with leaders, things that you do or practices that you use, because I would love to hear those too. What's missing from this list? What else do you use in terms of coaching moves? You can unmute or type in the chat box. Oh, Inbal, I love that. Stakeholder mapping, getting a sense of who's who, what are their interests, what's in it for them, right? What are the risk areas? That's part of a transition plan. Who are the risky stakeholders who are unhappy or resistant or have been burned by someone in this position before? Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Anything else that we would add? Okay, well, let me tie it together with just a few closing thoughts. So really some key takeaways here, I think, is this idea that the bottom line is that leader transitions are happening a lot and probably even more frequently in terms of given what's happening in organizations these days. And that it really is the transitions process psychologically, what people are going through. Great new job, yet I feel incompetent. So navigating that range of emotions and the polarities of those. Transitions that don't go well can result in derailment, and that can be really costly for everybody. So the key is like, how do we avoid that? Certainly go beyond that to really to achieve that break-even point faster. So thinking more holistically, it's not just coaching the leader, but how do we help the organization, those of us who can influence the larger context or system, to really support these new leaders in terms of their ability to function and accelerate it. And then we talked about really the three key parts: the transition plan and alignment with the boss on that, kind of the internal mentors, the cultural mentors, especially, who can be there as developmental partners. And then, of course, us as executive coaches that play an important role because we're not part of the system. But we can give maybe a little bit more on a objective perspective. So I really believe this, that executive coaching is an integral part, but that alone can't do it. I think we've got to consider a more systems approach to supporting leaders in transition. So I'll just go ahead and wrap it there. I hope this was helpful and really wonderful to get everybody involved. Oh, Gwen, that's, yeah, absolutely, that imposter syndrome. That happens so commonly. It really does. We think about what is people's sources of power, which is, I think, a big part of it. Thank you for that addition. Great. Well, unless there's any other questions, Carrie, I'll toss to you.
This was excellent. And Kevin, thank you just for your way of presenting such concise, well-rounded research. I think I can attest to the comments that it's been very well appreciated, and thank you for your expertise. For those who are here live, I did put a link to complete the evaluation. So if you need that ICF-CEU, you'll want to complete that in the next 48 hours. And this will be recorded and it'll be available on the Fielding website. You can always access our videos by going to the main webpage. And when you click on evidence-based coaching, it'll open up. And then if you scroll down, all of our videos are hyperlinked, and you'll see those hyperlinks on the far left side. There is a request. Can you share the source for the culture framework, norms, taboos, rituals, and symbols? Is there a source there for that?
I'll dig around to see if I've got that. Okay,
great. All right, thanks everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you for being here, and thanks for just participating in our coaching context series.
Great. All right, take care, everyone.